Hello! The lore vids were actually very well received, and I didn't even expect that, to be honest. I was just kind of doing them for my benefit. But yeah, with that being noticed, let's get on with another one, shall we? I'm going to do the history of Bretonnia. This is probably going to be a two-parter, but yeah, I think it's definitely the right choice right now. We know the Bretonnian free LC is going to come out soon, and also all my other lore vids have kind of mentioned at least something about Bretonnia. Hope you enjoy. Thou shalt give unto thine glorious liege the taxes that he requires. Thou shalt labour all but feast days, and no more than a 10th share shall you keep for kith and kin. Rejoice, for a knight of Bretonnia provides your shield. Vows of the peasants to their Bretonnian lord. The Kingdom of Bretonnia is a highly chivalrous feudal kingdom that lies between the lands of the Grey Mountains and the Great Ocean. Bretonnia is second only in size and military power to that of the Empire of Man, both their chief rival and closest ally, having a culture and society that revolves around the ideals of nobility, social birthright, and the upholding of a strictly enforced code of chivalry. Ruled by a royarch, the nation of Bretonnia has been known throughout the kingdoms of man for having the greatest knights within the entire Old World, rivaling or at least in some cases surpassing that of the knightly orders of the Empire. A proud and honourable kingdom, the warriors of Bretonnia comprised mostly of knights and noblemen who ride out into battle with lance, horse and sword, seeking out glories and rooting out injustice wherever they go. The religion that currently dominates this mighty feudal kingdom is the worship of the local elemental deity known only as the Lady of the Lake. This mysterious goddess of purity, light and order is believed to have aided Gauls Le Breton in unifying Bretonnia into a single unified nation during a greenskin invasion from the southern mountains in 798 IC. However, though these honourable warriors are meant to uphold chivalry and justice above all other traits, they are nonetheless afflicted with a much darker side from the shining knights they believe themselves to be. Within the feudal social structure of Bretonnia, these knights consider their lowly subjects as subhuman, as if they are nothing more than property in their hubris and arrogant eyes. Indeed, the life of a Bretonnian peasant is a life fraught with endless injustice and cruelty by a nobility whose sole duty was meant to protect them and to uphold their duties as beacons of justice. Though such cruelty and injustice have stained the honour of these proud knights, there is no doubt within the minds of the old world that the knights of Bretonnia are still amongst the greatest human warriors within the realms of man. History. The Bretonnian calendar is offset from the Sigmarian empires by about 777 years, as the people of the Bretonni weren't fully united until King Giles' reign as the first Bretonnian monarch in 977 IC. Bretonnian recorded history can vary greatly from duchy to duchy, being recorded and maintained such as it is mostly by monks with many Grail monasteries dotting the land. Common mythology and prehistory. The land of Bretonnia did not in fact truly exist during the time of Sigmar and the earliest days of the Empire. Indeed, many centuries passed before a great and noble knight united the highly independent and prideful Bretonni tribes in the same way Sigmar had with the birth of the Empire. The earliest days of Bretonnian history are not well recorded, though it has been conjectured that within the wider world it may have once been ruled over by cold-blooded lizardmen at the dawn of the planet's creation. Long after their first struggle to hold back the forces of chaos during the first chaos incursions, the land that would later become Bretonnia was settled by the High Elves of Ulthuan during the reign of Bel-Shanar. Elven colonies dotted the coast and larger rivers during the first years of their colonization, of which the most famous was the city of Toralessi. These colonies survived the civil war with Malekith, and then the Sundering relatively unscathed, but they were soon faced with the full wrath of the dwarves in a time known as the War of the Beard. Bretonnia was the primary battleground for this war, which lasted for well over 3 centuries. The conflict finally ended with the death of Phoenix King Kelidor II, and the subsequent capture of the Phoenix Crown by the dwarfs. The war had so weakened the High Elves by this time that the next Phoenix King ordered a withdrawal of all the elves back to Ulthuan, leaving those colonies that stay behind to fend for themselves. Those few elves who had refused his commands retreated into the enchanted glades of Athaloran, and over the centuries degenerated into the now feral wood elves. It was at this time that the first nomadic human settlers of Bretonnia appeared. Circa 1500 years before the time of Sigmar, an agricultural tribe of people arrived on the western edge of the Axbite Pass. These primitive tribes had little knowledge of metalwork or warfare, and relied heavily on agriculture and flint-crafted weapons to survive in the harsh wilderness. These groups of humans were known to have worshipped a primordial earth elemental goddess called Raya, and erected many primitive stone circles in her honour. These stone circles were places of great natural power, and were marked with symbols that remained as a foundation of the druidic Old Faith unto this day. Approximately 500 years later, around 1,000 years before the time of Sigmar, a second wave of human migrators crossed over to the World's Edge Mountains in tens of thousands, escaping the rampages of the greenskin threat. These new human tribes were warlike, strong and fierce, and they fought both the greenskin and their indigenous human populations alike. While most of these tribes settled within and eventually became the Empire, one far-ranging tribe crossed the Grey Mountains. This tribe, called the Bretonni, was to give its name to the land they found. Like their kins within the lands of the Empire, they displaced both the greenskins and the human earth worshippers, thus soon becoming the dominant culture west of the Grey Mountains. The Dark Age of Bretonnia, 900 to 977 IC. When Sigmar founded the Empire, he extended an invitation unto all the Bretonni warlords to join him in his new confederation. Despite noble Sigmar's goal of pan-human unity, the cultural differences between Bretonni and his people were apparently too large to overcome, thus his offer was quickly rebuffed. While the Empire experienced many growing pains throughout the first millennium of its existence, the Bretonni would remain as a whole a fractured people. It would be foolish to say that they did not advance, though. In time, trade and knowledge of masonry and metalworks was eventually gained by the nearby proximity of dwarfs living within the Grey Mountains, which allowed the early sub-tribes of the Bretonni to resemble something closer towards their modern state. By the year 770 IC, the lands of all Bretonnia had been divided into 16 realms, each ruled by a duke. The murderous greenskins had lived within the lands alongside Bretonni for many years, and as is normal for these foul creatures, their population eventually reached critical levels and began to overrun the Bretonni lands in a seething green tide. By the year of 930 IC, a massive horde of orcs, led by the warlord Gragaband, poured out of the mountains of Massif Orcal and overran the lands of Silueu. Faced with an imminent destruction, the last of the remaining knights of Silu rode out at last in a desperate battle and fought the greenskins on the open plains. Though the greenskins fell like wheat before the scythe, the last of the knights of Silu perished to the last man. In the wake of this disaster, the armies of Quelain and Brion rode forth and attacked the now weakened Dork army. No sooner had the orcs begun to rout from the battlefield than the two Bretonnia armies faced each other for rulership over the charred husk that was Silu. Unfortunately, the two armies hadn't the stomach to face each other in open combat, and instead the two dukes of each kingdom fought one another in an honourable duel. By the duel's end, the Lord of Brion was struck down, and Quenelles was expanded. It is said that the destruction of Silu marked the beginning of the wars that would culminate in the unification of the entire kingdom. By 932 IC, Baldwin, the newly stated young Duke of Brion, led his armies to victory after defeating the hordes of Gragaband and slaying the warlord in single combat. In the battle, Gragaband's great axe became lodged fast in Baldwin's shield, and the lord fought the entire battle with the axe in place. Afterwards, the axe was adopted as the symbol of Brion in the memory of this event. This victory did not stop the orcs, however, and around 948 IC, the northern lands of Bretonnia were engulfed by waves of enemy armies. The northern raiders from the frigid shores of Norska burned the coastlines from Lyon and Couronne. At the same time, thundering hooves of the beastmen war herds could be heard, pouring out of the forests of Arden and raiding the surrounding area. The Bretonni of the northern lands could not fight these enemies in the open, and relinquished all they had once ruled, hiding behind their stout walls while the enemy roamed across their lands at will. At the same time, a fourth army arrived. The undead armies of Cetra the Imperishable and his fleet of rotting warships and skeletal warriors appeared upon the western coast of Bretonnia. No sooner had the orcs and goblin armies rampaged through the realms than the undead hordes swept across the lands and completed the desolation with silent impunity. To the south and east, reckless goblin tribes came down from their homes within the Grey Mountains, pillaging and burning their way through the dukedoms of Quenelles and Basteron. By 974 IC, orc tribes poured from all the mountains and forest in numbers never before seen in Bretonnia's history. Cut off from aid, the once ancient dukedom of Glambriel was utterly destroyed. In response, the Bretonni knights rose up against the onslaught of the Greenskins, charging headlong towards the many battlefields that were springing up all across their realms. However, the lords of each dukedom had not the time to properly gather their knights into single unified forces. Outnumbered and surrounded, these scattered bands of knights were soon overwhelmed by the superior numbers of the Greenskin hordes. With the enemies of mankind amassing all around them, the remaining dukes had all but lost hope. One of the Bretonni dukes, however, did not give way to despair, and was determined to unite all of his people into a single unified nation. This legendary uniter was Duke Giles Le Breton, the newly crowned Duke of Basteron, the famous knight who personally slew the red worm Smurgus deep within the forest of Chalon. Giles first rallied Duke Therolf de Lyonesse, and then his greatest and most royal friend, Duke Landuin de Mousillon, under his crusading banner, but even these three men and their combined grand army found themselves outmatched and facing almost certain annihilation. This inexperienced and badly battered Bretonni army then encamped themselves beside a lake. Upon the morrow, they felt certain to face their doom upon the field of battle, with the war drums of the Orc allowing them no rest or sleep. That morning, when all the hope seemed lost for the Bretonni cause, a true miracle unfolded upon Giles and his army of knights. As Giles knelt before the lakeside to drink of its pure waters and pray for strength, an ethereal and heavenly beautiful woman rose out of the mists, leaving the Bretonni army aghast and afraid. Giles was the first to make a move, raising the blood-stained and tattered banner of Baston high. Inspired by some genius or desperate madness, he cried out, "Lady, wilt thou bless my banner?" He then dipped it into the lake at the lady's feet. When he drew it forth and raised it high again so all could see, it was dry and fully restored, only now also emblazoned with the glowing icon of a golden grail. The other dukes and knights then scrambled to follow his example, asking the lady to bless their sword, lance, or even warhorse for the coming battle. Finally, the lady held forth a large gilded chalice overflowing with light, giving it first to Giles, and then to his companions to drink from and gain the strength needed to achieve victory. These three became the first Grail Knights, and fighting under the banner of the Lady of the Lake, the Bretonni gained the courage needed to face the Greenskins upon the plains. Then the screeches of the approaching enemy was heard from all sides, fouling the air with the war cries and drumming. The knights hurriedly took up their weapons and mounted their war horses. They gathered in a battle line around Giles and the banner. The orc horde darkened the horizon ahead of the Bretonnian knights. Steadily, and without flinching, they rode on as the arrows dropped around them. Then the moment came to charge, and the knights plunged into the midst of the orc horde. The first ranks of the enemy crumbled before them. The entire horde reeled like a great beast peered by the hunter's lance. The knights cleaved through wave after wave of the enemy, and burst forth into an open plain beyond. All around them the enemy began to scatter in flight. As the sun began to set, the knights ceased their pursuit and rode back to the sacred lake. Here they gathered once more, and rested as the rooks and ravens descended to feast upon the orcish slain. All of the dukes and knights gathered around Giles, and together they vowed to serve and honour the Lady of the Lake. They also vowed to stay together as an army and free Bretonnia from orcs and all her other foes. Giles was proclaimed leader of battles, with the authority to command the army with the entire resources of all the dukedoms until Bretonnia was freed. This moment marked the origin of the Grail Knights, and also the Kingdom of Bretonnia. In the years that followed, under the banner of the Lady of the Lake, Giles led the Grail Knights from victory to victory throughout the length and breadth of Bretonnia.